Are we recording?
Yeah, we are.
Fantastic. Okay, so what is up guys? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I want to talk to you quickly about the Fujinon 16-80 f4. This is the new kit lens from Fuji that basically accompanies the Fuji X-T4. You can buy this in a kit, or you can buy the Fujinon 16-80 as a separate lens for $800. Now, $800 does not sound like money that you pay for a kit lens, especially when you consider the fact that the old Nikon and Canon kit lenses can be had for like $50 to $80. Like, why would I pay $800 for a lens when I can buy a camera with 2 lenses and extra batteries for that price? I mean, it's expensive. So for a kit lens at that price point, there's a lot to be expected. Now, this kit lens, I'm supposing, is supposed to be replacing the old Fujinon 18-55, which was an f2.8 to f4. The problem with that lens, I suppose, was the fact that it was a 2.8 to f4, so it wasn't a constant aperture. Well, it's not really a problem, especially when you take photos. But for video shooters, that would be a constant problem because your f-stop was constantly changing anytime you zoomed in and zoomed out. So, you know, the amount of light your lens was letting in when you were all the way wide at 18 to when you were all the way out there at 55 was completely different from one another. But the 16-80 kind of solves that problem by giving you a constant aperture. But that also then created another problem, which I'm going to talk about later on in this video. Now, the first thing I want to talk about with this lens is the build quality and the way that it feels. Now, it's not weather sealed, but it does have optical image stabilization, although there is no switch to turn it on or off. And that was like kind of weird to me because, as I understand, many other Fujinon lenses that actually have OIS let you switch it on or off if you want to use it or you don't want to use it, which I thought was great. But for whatever reason, you can't actually do that with this particular one. But then again, why would you want to turn off your OIS, right? So that's not a bad thing. Now, especially because this is being bundled with the X-T4, it's actually great because the X-T4 also has IBIS, which is actually IBIS that's slightly better than the Fuji X-H1, which is currently shooting me right now. So that's also great. But of course, if you're paying $800 for a lens, you actually probably kind of expect that you would have the option to turn off your OIS or turn it on in case you don't want to use it. That's just a thought. Now, this lens, unlike my 50-140 that's currently shooting me right now, doesn't actually zoom internally. So when you actually zoom from 16 to 80, you see a physical movement of the barrel. As opposed to the 50-140 where from my zoom ranges of 50 to 140, the lens doesn't even move. It's all an internal zoom, which is quite fantastic. But then again, we have to consider the fact that this lens is almost double the price of that one, and Fuji specifically markets the 16-80 as a kit lens, even though it's still very expensive for a kit lens. So the fact that the barrel actually moves is a problem, or is going to be a problem for a lot of video shooters, and it really shouldn't be, because see, the 16-55 red badge 2.8 lens actually moves as well, but when it moves, there is no change in the exposure. Like, you're seeing the same amount of light constant as you zoom in and as you zoom back out, so that never changes. But for some weird reason, with the 16-80, when I zoom in and zoom out, I was constantly seeing changes in my aperture. It was almost as if when you zoom, the lens and the camera has to then adjust for that, and then after it adjusts, then the exposure is the same again. That's terrible, because if I'm shooting static and I'm using like a focus puller to like adjust my zoom gradually because I want to do an effect or parallax thing, that's going to mess up my shot because the exposure is going to constantly change. And I thought the point of constant aperture lenses was to completely avoid that. Whatever the case, again, this is a kit lens, so you have to keep this in mind, and that's pretty much how the lens performed for me. I am a primary video shooter, not a photo shooter, so my biases are always going to be towards video shooting, if that makes sense. Most of the time, my camera is on video mode, and I almost never shoot any photos, but maybe except when I want to shoot thumbnails and I can't just screen grab from the actual video that I already made. Now, moving on from that, let's actually talk about the photos from this lens. And honestly, calling this lens sharp would be an insult or an understatement to the lens. The lens is fantastic. The photos directly out of the camera when I'm shooting in classic chrome just look absolutely ridiculous. Then when I take these photos into Lightroom or Capture One and actually do a little bit of editing, they look phenomenal. In fact, I can probably very easily say that f4 as a constant aperture for zoom lens at 16-80, it's probably the best thing that's happened since sliced bread. It's fantastic, truthfully. One thing that I should point out again is that as a primary video shooter and somebody who doesn't care much for photos, I'm not the kind of person that's going to zoom in 200% into the corner of an image and tell you, oh my god, I see chromatic aberration there. I'm a user experience type of guy, so I'm going to tell you how something performed when I used it, and I'm not going to focus too much on all the technicalities. Honestly, I barely know what that would mean if I zoomed in and said I saw chromatic aberration, so I cannot relate that information to you guys. So if you wanted that, I am sorry. Now, moving on to other things about this lens, the 16 to 80 zoom is a very wide range. It's longer than the 16 to 55 2.8, which I also used recently, and it's wider than the 18 to 55, which has the 2.8 to f4 aperture, which is not great for video shooters, but also has optical image stabilization, so that lens is actually pretty good. Now, you can have that lens for about less than what you would pay for the 16 to 80, and in my opinion, I don't really see why anyone is paying $800 for a kit lens. It's a kit lens. It's not a red badge lens. It doesn't perform like an eye-hand lens. It's not built like the eye-hand lenses. So why does it cost $800? It's so ridiculous and so expensive to me. Now, again, I am not trying to force anybody to not buy this lens. I think it's a great lens, especially for photo shooters. For video, not so much. But if you want a kit lens that's better than the 18 to 55 that you would otherwise get with the older Fuji cameras, the 16 to 80 is definitely a very great look, and it actually does perform better in video than the other kit lenses, so it's a decent option. I just feel like the price lets it down a little bit, and the price is like the major gripe and the reason why I personally wouldn't buy this lens, except for, you know, buying it with the Fuji X-T4, which I actually did because I was curious and I was hoping it would actually perform like my 50 to 140, which when I think about it now was a little ignorant of me, because I mean, why would I expect a lens that's half the price, not a red badge lens, that was actually marketed as an alternative to 18 to 55 kit lens, to perform as well as my $1,600 lens? Very irresponsible. But anyways, that's pretty much all my thoughts about the Fujinon 16 to 80 f4 OIS, not WR because it's not weather resistant lens. It's a really good lens, especially if you're focused on photo. If you want to pick it up, you could pick it up if you have the $800 to spare. It's not a bad lens to own, but personally for a video shooter, I wouldn't buy this lens. Anyways, if you'd like to check out this lens, there's going to be links in the description below so that you can go check that out. Thank you so much for watching, and I guess I will see you on another video that was shot by Kagan. Peace.